On a porch in Texas, the sun sets like a dying ember, but tonight the silence of the ranch is replaced by the roar of 80,000 souls waiting for a king who is about to break. The orange glow of the fading day washed over the weathered wooden planks of the porch, casting long, sorrowful shadows that stretched out toward the horizon, where the land met the sky in a bruised line of purple and gold. It was the kind of evening that usually brought peace to a man's soul, the kind of stillness that allowed a cowboy to sit back with a glass of iced tea and watch the cattle graze in the distance, knowing that the world was turning exactly as the good Lord intended. But tonight, there was no peace to be found on the sprawling acres of the ranch that George Strait called home, and the silence that usually comforted him now felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating and thick with unspoken fears. He sat in his rocking chair, the wood creaking rhythmically beneath his weight, but his eyes were not fixed on the majestic beauty of the Texas sunset. Instead, his gaze was locked onto the small, dark screen of an old smartphone that rested in the calloused palm of his right hand. It was a device he usually despised, preferring the honest connection of a handshake or a landline call, but for the past 3 weeks, it had become his lifeline, his tormentor, and the only thing keeping his heart from shattering into a million jagged pieces. George took a deep, shuddering breath, the air filling his lungs with the scent of dry grass and impending rain, but it did nothing to settle the nausea that had taken up permanent residence in his stomach. He was the king of country, a living legend who had stood before millions of adoring fans, a man who had stared down bulls and navigated the treacherous waters of the music industry without ever losing his hat or his dignity. Yet, in this moment, sitting alone on his porch while the rest of the world prepared to celebrate his legacy, he felt like a frightened child waiting for a monster to emerge from the dark. The phone remained silent, a black mirror reflecting the worry etched deep into the lines of his face. He ran his thumb over the screen, a nervous tick that he couldn't control, waiting for a vibration, a ring, a ping, anything that would tell him that Michael was alive. Michael was not his blood, but blood didn't make a father. Love did. George had taken the boy in when he was just a scrap of a thing, a wild-eyed kid with a chip on his shoulder and a hole in his heart the size of Texas after his parents had passed in a car wreck on Route 66. George had taught him how to rope a calf, how to tune a guitar, and how to look a man in the eye when you shook his hand. He had watched Michael grow from a troubled boy into a man of honor, a man who felt the call of duty so strongly that he had traded his Wranglers for the uniform of the United States Marine Corps. George had been proud, so incredibly proud, the day Michael had shipped out, standing tall and salute-ready, but that pride was now warring with a terror so profound it threatened to bring the old cowboy to his knees. Michael had been deployed to a region that didn't appear on most tourist maps, a place of sand and conflict, and 3 weeks ago, the communication had stopped. Just stopped. No emails, no scheduled calls, just a terrifying silence and a vague bureaucratic notification from the Department of Defense that Sergeant Michael Reynolds was officially listed as missing in action. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, taking the last of the light with it, and George knew it was time to move. He wasn't just a worried father tonight, he was a commodity, a headline, the main attraction. 80,000 people were gathering at the AT&T Stadium in Arlington, having paid their hard-earned money to see the legend perform on what was billed as the biggest night of his farewell tour. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. He was expected to sing about heartaches and honky-tonks, about love lost and found, while the only person who mattered to him might be lying dead in a desert halfway across the world. He stood up, his joints popping, and slid the phone into the front pocket of his starched denim jeans. It felt heavy, like a stone, but he would not leave it behind. He walked to the waiting black SUV, the gravel crunching under his boots, and didn't look back at the empty porch. The ranch would be there when he returned. The question that haunted him was whether Michael would ever see it again. The drive to the stadium was a blur of highway lights and police escorts, a surreal procession that felt more like a funeral motorcade than a victory lap. When the massive structure of the stadium came into view, glowing like a spaceship that had landed in the middle of the Texas plains, George felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. Inside that steel belly, the machinery of modern entertainment was already grinding. This wasn't the honky-tonk circuit of his youth. This was a corporate beast, and tonight, the beast was being steered by a man named Julian. Julian was everything George was not. Young, frantic, and obsessed with the optics of the digital age, Julian had been brought in by the promoters to modernize the broadcast for the global streaming audience. He viewed the concert not as a musical experience, but as a content delivery system. As George walked through the concrete tunnels of the stadium's bowels, the air conditioning chilling the sweat on his neck, he could hear Julian's voice barking orders through the open door of the production office. The man was shouting about camera angles and social media engagement rates, his words sharp and fast, lacking any of the drawl or patience that George valued. George entered the dressing room, a space that had been decorated to look like a high-end living room, but felt as sterile as a hospital waiting area. He placed his hat on the vanity and sat down, immediately pulling the phone from his pocket. No new notifications. The signal bars were full, but the inbox was empty. He stared at the last picture Michael had sent him, a selfie of the young Marine in full gear, giving a thumbs up with a dusty, tired smile. "Don't worry, Uncle George," the caption read. "I'm invincible." George traced the smile on the screen with his finger, a lump forming in his throat that no amount of water could wash away. The door to the dressing room burst open, and Julian swept in, followed by a trail of assistants clutching clipboards and tablets. Julian was wearing a suit that was too tight and shoes that cost more than George's first truck. He had a Bluetooth headset blinking in his ear and a look of manic determination in his eyes. He stopped when he saw George, his eyes darting immediately to the phone in the singer's hand. "George! Good, you're here. We're 30 minutes to downbeat," Julian said, his voice clipped. "Listen, we need to go over the final protocol for the encore. The pyrotechnics team has adjusted the timing on the fire jets during the cowboy rides away, so you need to be exactly on the mark." George nodded slowly, not looking up from the phone. "I know the mark, son. I've been hitting marks since before you were born." Julian chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Right, of course. Now, one more thing. The network executives are very specific about the visual aesthetic tonight. We're shooting in 8K for the Asian and European markets. We need total immersion. That means no modern artifacts on stage that aren't part of the set design." He extended a manicured hand toward George. "I'll take the phone. We'll keep it safe in the lockbox with your wallet and keys. You can have it back the second you step off stage." George finally looked up. His blue eyes, usually crinkled with warmth, were flat and hard as frozen steel. He didn't move to hand over the device. He simply stared at Julian until the younger man's smile began to falter. "The phone stays with me," George said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a judge passing a sentence. Julian blinked, confused. He wasn't used to talent defying him on technical matters. "I don't think you understand, George. The radio frequencies from the device can interfere with the new wireless microphone packs we're using. Plus the bulge in your pocket. It ruins the silhouette. The lighting director is going for a very specific shadow profile during the acoustic set. It looks unprofessional." George stood up slowly, towering over the producer. He adjusted his belt buckle, the large silver trophy gleaming under the harsh dressing room lights. "Unprofessional is telling a man he can't keep a line open to his family. This phone goes in my pocket. If it rings or if it vibrates, I'm checking it. I don't care if I'm in the middle of the chorus of Amarillo by Morning, I'm checking it." Julian's face flushed with irritation. "George, look, I respect your process or whatever, but we have contracts. The streaming partners demand a seamless experience. If you stop the show to check a text message, we lose viewers. The retention graph will nosedive. We can't have you distracted." "Distracted?" George let out a short, bitter laugh. "Son, I'm not distracted. I'm focused on the only thing that matters. My boy is missing. He's been missing for 3 weeks. Tonight is the deadline the colonel gave me. Tonight, they either find him or they declare him gone. So you can take your retention graphs and your 8K cameras and you can shove them where the sun don't shine. I'm singing because I signed a paper that said I would, but my heart is in a sandbox 6,000 miles away." The phone stays. The room went silent. The assistants looked at the floor, terrified. Julian opened his mouth to argue, to cite the insurance clauses, but something in George's demeanor stopped him. It was the look of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Julian pulled his hand back, adjusting his cuffs nervously. "Fine," Julian snapped, turning on his heel, "but keep it on silent. And for God's sake, don't let the cameras see it. If you ruin the immersion, it's on you." He stormed out, barking into his headset about microphone frequencies, leaving George alone in the silence once more. George sat back down, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't a man given to confrontation, but he felt raw, his nerves exposed. He checked the phone again. Nothing. He looked at the time, 20 minutes. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, the same one he had been whispering every hour for 21 days. Lord, bring him home. Just bring him home. Take everything I have. Take the music. Take the money. Take the fame. Just don't take my boy. The knock on the door was softer this time. It was his band leader, Rick, a man who had been by George's side for 40 years. Rick stepped in, holding his fiddle, his face etched with concern. He didn't ask about the set list. He didn't ask about the sound check. Any word? Rick asked softly. George shook his head, unable to speak. Rick walked over and placed a hand on George's shoulder. He's a fighter, George. He's got your grit. He's going to make it. He's just a boy, Rick, George whispered, his voice cracking. He's just a boy who wanted to make his old man proud. I should have stopped him. I should have told him to go to college, to play football, anything but this. You couldn't have stopped him, Rick said gently. He wanted to serve. It's who he is. Now you've got 80,000 people out there who need you. They need to believe that everything is going to be all right. You've got to go out there and give them hope, George, even if you don't have any left for yourself. George nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He stood up and placed his black cowboy hat on his head, pulling the brim down low. He checked the phone one last time, ensuring the volume was up, and slid it into his front pocket. He could feel it against his thigh, a constant physical reminder of the stakes. Let's go, George said, his voice sounding stronger than he felt. The walk to the stage was a journey through the belly of the beast. The noise grew louder with every step, a physical vibration that shook the concrete walls. The crew members parted like the Red Sea as George walked by, giving him respectful nods, but he barely saw them. His mind was replaying the last time he saw Michael. It was at the airport. Michael had hugged him, the rough fabric of the uniform scratching George's neck. I'll be back before you know it, Uncle George. Keep the guitar tuned for me. George reached the side of the stage. The darkness was absolute, save for the blinking lights of the amplifiers and the glow of the monitors. Julian was in the control booth high above, looking down like a vengeful god, ready to orchestrate the perfect show. The house lights dimmed. The roar of the crowd became a deafening scream. 80,000 people, a sea of cowboy hats and lit-up cell phones waiting for the king. The announcer's voice boomed over the PA system, shaking the floorboards. Ladies and gentlemen, the king of country, George Strait. The spotlight hit him. It was blindingly bright, hot and white. George stepped out onto the stage, the guitar strapped across his chest. He smiled, that famous crooked smile that had melted hearts for decades, but inside, he was screaming. He walked to the microphone, the cheers washing over him. He strummed the first chord of Deep in the Heart of Texas, and the crowd exploded. But as he sang the opening lines, his hand instinctively went to his pocket. He wasn't touching the strings, he was touching the phone. He needed to know it was there. He needed to feel the connection. Up in the control booth, Julian watched the monitor with hawk-like intensity. He saw George's hand brush his pocket. He saw the subtle distraction in George's eyes. He's checking it, Julian hissed into his headset. He's checking the damn phone. Look at him, he's not present. The close-up on camera 2 shows him looking down every 5 seconds. What do you want to do, boss? The technical director asked. Julian narrowed his eyes. He had a schedule to keep. He had a broadcast to perfect. If George couldn't discipline himself, Julian would have to do it for him. Is the local signal jammer active? The one we use to prevent audio feedback from the front row? Yes, but it's set to low power, just for the immediate pit area. Boost it, Julian ordered, a cold smirk playing on his lips. Boost it to cover the center stage. Cut the cellular frequencies in that specific zone. If his phone is a brick, maybe he'll focus on doing his job. But sir, the engineer hesitated, that will cut off his personal device entirely. He won't receive anything. That's the point, Julian snapped. Do it, now. On stage, George was moving through the first set. He finished a song and the crowd cheered. In the brief silence between tracks, he slipped his hand into his pocket and pressed the side button to light up the screen through the fabric, just to check the signal bars. He had been doing it all night. But this time, as he glanced down discreetly, he saw the bars vanish, one by one, from 4 bars to no service. George froze, his heart hammered against his ribs. He took a step to the left, trying to find a signal. Nothing. He took a step back. Nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his chest. He looked up at the control booth, his eyes wide with realization. They had cut him off. In the exact moment he needed to be reachable, they had severed the line. He was alone, truly alone. Surrounded by 80,000 people, bathed in light, but trapped in a cage of silence. The music for the next song started. Check, yes or no. A happy, upbeat tune. George stepped to the microphone, his legs feeling like lead. He opened his mouth to sing, but his mind was screaming. What if the call comes now? What if they are trying to tell me he's found? What if they are trying to tell me he's dead? He forced the words out. It started way back in 3rd grade. But the joy was gone from his voice. It was mechanical. He was a robot performing a function while his soul was frantically clawing at the walls of the signal blackout. He looked out at the audience, seeing their smiling faces, their oblivious happiness, and he felt a surge of resentment. How could they cheer? How could the world keep spinning when Michael was missing? Every second that ticked by felt like an hour. Every note he played felt like a betrayal. He was failing his fans. He was failing Julian's precious broadcast. But most of all, he felt like he was failing Michael. He was the protector, the father figure. And here he was, singing catchy tunes while his boy might be bleeding out in the sand. The set continued. The pressure built. Julian in the booth watched with satisfaction as George stopped touching his pocket. "See?" Julian said to the engineer. "He's focused now. The performance is tightening up." He couldn't have been more wrong. George wasn't focused, he was desperate. He was calculating. He was looking at the side of the stage, wondering if he could walk off, wondering if he could just drop the guitar and leave. But the code of the cowboy was strong. You finish the ride, you stay on the bull until the buzzer. But this wasn't a bull, this was his life. As the concert neared its halfway point, George prepared for the slower, more acoustic section of the show. He sat on a high stool in the center of the stage. The lights dimmed to a deep, melancholic blue. The stadium grew quieter, intimate. He picked up his acoustic guitar. The song was Troubadour, a song about looking back, a song about the end of the road. George closed his eyes. He needed a miracle. He didn't need a signal jammer. He needed a direct line to God. And as he strummed the first chord, the universe, or perhaps just a faulty fuse in the overpriced lighting rig that Julian had demanded, decided to intervene. The acoustic guitar rested against George Strait's chest, a beautiful instrument of spruce and rosewood that had been his companion through decades of smoky bars and sold-out arenas. But tonight, as he sat on the solitary stool in the center of the vast stage, the guitar felt less like an instrument and more like a shield. The stadium had darkened, the house lights dipping into a deep oceanic indigo, creating an illusion of intimacy amidst the sprawling mass of 80,000 strangers. The air conditioning hummed, a low-frequency drone that vibrated beneath the floorboards, battling the heat generated by the crowd. George adjusted the microphone stand, his movements slow and deliberate, buying himself seconds. He was stalling, though no one in the audience knew it. To them, he was the master of pacing, the cowboy sage preparing to deliver a sermon in song. To himself, he was a drowning man looking for a piece of driftwood. He plucked the E string. It rang out clear and true, echoing into the rafters. He began the intro to Troubadour. It was a song about the passage of time, about seeing your reflection in the mirror and recognizing the young man you used to be while accepting the old man you had become. Usually, this song brought him a sense of peace and nostalgic warmth. Tonight, the lyrics felt like an accusation. I was a young troubadour when I rode in on a song. The words caught in his throat. How could he sing about the glory of the road when the road had taken Michael so far away? How could he celebrate a life of music when the silence from the desert was deafening? High above in the control booth, enclosed in soundproof glass and surrounded by a bank of monitors that glowed like the cockpit of a spacecraft, Julian was pacing. He was agitated, his eyes darting between the live feed, the social media sentiment graphs, and the technical readouts. Retention is holding steady at 98%, an assistant chirped, not looking up from a tablet. Twitter is trending Chapter King George. They love the lighting. Good, Julian muttered, biting his thumbnail. But he's dragging the tempo. Look at him. He's playing Troubadour at 68 beats per minute. It's supposed to be 72. He's sluggish. It's that damn phone. Even with the signal jammed, he's thinking about it. I can see it in his posture. Julian leaned over the mixing console, pressing the talkback button that connected only to the stage director's earpiece. Tighten the spotlight. Make it blinding. I want him to feel the heat. I want him to focus on the audience, not his pockets. And double-check that jammer. I don't want a single stray signal getting through. The jammer is running hot, Julian, the engineer replied, his voice tinny in the headset. We're pushing the localized blackout to the limit. If we push it any harder, we risk tripping the breakers for the stage monitors. I don't care, Julian snapped. Just keep him isolated. He's an artist. He needs boundaries to create. Back on stage, the atmosphere was thick with an emotion the audience couldn't quite place. They sensed a heaviness in George's performance, a raw vulnerability that they assumed was just artistic depth. They didn't know they were watching a man on the edge of a breakdown. George closed his eyes as he sang the chorus. I still feel 25 most of the time. And then it happened. It wasn't a grand explosion nor a dramatic crash. It was a simple failure of physics and overambition. The signal jammer, an illegal piece of hardware that Julian had insisted on using, was drawing power from the same auxiliary circuit as the massive new LED lighting rig that had been installed for the 8K broadcast. As the lighting director pushed the faders up to create a sunrise effect behind George for the bridge of the song, the power draw spiked. A circuit breaker in the sub-basement of the stadium tripped with a loud clack that no one heard. On stage, nothing seemed to change visually. The backup generators kicked in instantly for the lights and sound, but the jammer, the device meant to keep the world out, died instantly. It powered down, its cooling fans spinning to a halt. Invisible to the eye, the electromagnetic spectrum around George Strait flooded back in. The 5G waves, the LTE signals, the Wi-Fi packets, they all rushed into the vacuum like water breaking through a dam. George was in the middle of a delicate finger-picking solo. The stadium was silent, listening to every nuance of the guitar. Bzzzt, bzzzt. George felt it first, a phantom vibration against his thigh. His heart skipped a beat. He told himself it was his imagination, a cruel trick of his desperate mind. Then the sound came. Because the phone was pressed tight against his leg, and his leg was pressed against the guitar, and the guitar was resonant wood sitting inches from a sensitive condenser microphone, the sound was amplified 1,000 times. Ping. It was a sharp digital chime, the default notification sound of a text message. It cut through the acoustic air like a gunshot in a library. Ping. A second one. The sound boomed through the massive speaker arrays hanging from the ceiling. It echoed off the back walls of the stadium. It was unmistakably, undeniably, a cell phone notification. The audience rippled with confusion. A few people chuckled, thinking perhaps a fan in the front row had been too loud. Others looked around, wondering if it was part of the song. But George stopped playing. His hands froze over the strings. The sudden silence from the guitar made the next sound even louder. The phone in his pocket vibrated long and hard, the sound of a heavy data packet arriving. In the control booth, Julian screamed, "What is that? I said kill the signal! Cut his mic! Cut the damn mic!" The sound engineer's hand hovered over the mute button for George's vocal mic, but he hesitated. This was George Strait. You don't just mute the king of country in the middle of a set. That hesitation was all that was needed. George didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the band. He didn't look at the furious stage manager waving his arms in the wings. He set the guitar down on the stand with trembling hands. The instrument made a hollow thud that resonated through the system. He reached into his pocket. The giant screens above the stage, the ones meant to broadcast a flawless cinematic experience, now showed a tight close-up of George's hands. The 8K cameras, crisp and unforgiving, captured the tremors in his fingers. They captured the weathered skin, the veins standing out with adrenaline. He pulled the phone out. A collective gasp went through the arena. It was a breach of protocol so severe, so out of character for the professional cowboy, that the audience knew instantly this wasn't a skit. This wasn't a bit. George stared at the screen. The bright light of the display illuminated his face from below, casting ghostly shadows into his eye sockets. "No," Julian whispered in the booth, his face draining of color. "Don't you dare read that. Pick up the guitar. Sing, you old fool, sing." But George was deaf to the demands of the industry. He was staring at a notification bar that simply read, "Message from Michael." His thumb hovered over the screen. He couldn't breathe. The air in the stadium felt thin, insufficient. Video. Why video? Was it a goodbye? Was it a recording found on a body? Was it a terrorist propaganda clip sent from a stolen phone? The possibilities raced through his mind, each one more horrific than the last. He felt bile rise in his throat. He looked up, and for the first time he really saw the audience. 80,000 faces. Waiting. Judging? No, they weren't judging. The laughter had died down. The silence was absolute. They saw the tears standing in his eyes. They saw the fear. George made a decision. He wasn't going to hide this. He couldn't. He leaned toward the microphone, holding the phone with both hands as if it were a holy relic. "Folks," his voice cracked. It wasn't the smooth baritone of the records. It was the gravelly, broken voice of a grandfather. I need to ask your forgiveness." The feedback loop whined slightly, a high-pitched squeal that the engineer quickly corrected. "I know you paid good money to hear songs," George continued, tears now freely tracking through the deep lines of his cheeks. "But there's a song I've been waiting to hear for 3 weeks, and I think it just started playing." He looked at the phone again. He swiped the screen. In the booth, Julian was slamming his fist on the console. "Cut the video feed. Go to black. Go to the logo." "I can't," the video director shouted back, mesmerized by the drama unfolding. It's too real. Look at the audience. They're crying, Julian. Look at them." George tapped the play button. The video began to buffer. The little white circle spun in the center of the screen. To George, that spinning circle was the wheel of fate. "Load. Please load." The connection, free from the jammer, was strong. The video popped open. George didn't keep it to himself. In a moment of pure, unadulterated vulnerability, he held the phone up to his microphone, turning the small screen toward himself, but letting the audio feed into the system. Static hissed through the stadium speakers. Then, a voice. "Hey, Uncle George." The voice was raspy, dry, weak, but it was him. George let out a sob that was picked up by the mic, a sound so guttural and painful that it made grown men in the audience clutch their chests. I know I missed our Sunday call," the voice on the recording continued. The audio quality was poor, filled with wind and the distant thrum of engines. "My battery is at 2%, but I had to tell you." There was a pause in the recording, a cough. George's knees gave way. He sat back down heavily on the stool, his hand clutching the phone so tight his knuckles were white. "We got pinned down, Uncle George. It was bad, real bad. We were in a cave for, I don't know how long, days, weeks." The audience was paralyzed. No one moved. No one filmed. They were witnessing a confession from the grave, or a miracle. They didn't know which yet. But the birds came. Michael's voice cracked with emotion. "The extraction team. They got us. I'm on a bird right now headed to Ramstein and then straight to Texas." George looked up at the ceiling, tears streaming down his face, his chest heaving. "I'm coming home, Uncle George. I'm banged up. Got a new scar to show you. But I'm coming home. Don't stop the music for me. I want to hear you singing when I walk through that door. I love you, Dad. I mean, Uncle George. I love you." The video cut to black. For 3 seconds, the stadium was a vacuum. The silence was so profound it felt physical. Then it broke. It didn't start with applause. It started with a roar. A primal, collective release of tension from 80,000 people who had just walked through the valley of the shadow of death with their idol. It was a wave of sound that shook the steel girders of the roof. People were hugging strangers. People were crying openly. George sat on the stool weeping. He buried his face in his hands, the phone still clutched in his palm. He wasn't the king of country anymore. He was just a man who had gotten his life back. Julian, in the booth, slumped into his expensive ergonomic chair. He watched the monitors. He saw the raw emotion. He saw the metrics on the social media dashboard, which he usually worshipped, flatline, not because people lost interest, but because people had put their phones down to cry. He realized, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that he had almost destroyed the most powerful moment in entertainment history for the sake of a clean signal. George finally wiped his face with his sleeve. He stood up. He looked exhausted, aged 10 years in 10 minutes, but his eyes were shining with a light that hadn't been there at the start of the show. He approached the mic. He didn't need to quiet the crowd. They quieted for him, waiting for his command. "He's alive," George whispered. The crowd erupted again, a shorter, affirmative cheer. "He's alive," George said louder, his voice gaining strength. My boy is alive. He grabbed the guitar neck, but he didn't put it on. He held it like a walking stick. I don't know if I can sing right now. My hands are shaking too bad. We love you, George, a voice screamed from the front row. George smiled, a genuine, watery smile. I love you too. I truly do. You see, that boy, Michael, I didn't have kids of my own. God didn't see fit to give me that, but he gave me Michael. And when Michael went missing, I went missing too. He paced the small circle of the spotlight. I was angry. I was angry at the war, angry at the world, angry at this guitar. I wanted to quit. Tonight. Tonight was supposed to be a show, just a show. I didn't want to be here. A hush fell over the crowd at the confession. But I'm glad I'm here, George said, looking up at the booth, directly into the camera lens that he knew Julian was watching. Because you can't go through hell alone. And you folks, you just waited with me. You waited while I got the news. He took a deep breath. The message said he's coming home. That he's on his way to Texas. George looked down at the phone again. He hadn't noticed it before in the blur of tears, but there was a second notification beneath the video. A map pin. He frowned. He tapped the screen. Wait a minute, George muttered into the mic. The map opened. It wasn't showing Ramstein Air Base in Germany. It wasn't showing a hospital in Bethesda. The blue dot of his current location was blinking in the center of the AT&T Stadium. The red pin of the shared location, Michael's location, was blinking right next to it. George's heart stopped. He zoomed in. The red pin was moving. It was moving through the service corridors. It was moving past the loading dock. It was moving toward the stage left entrance. George looked up, his eyes wide, scanning the darkness of the wings. He looked at the security guards who were standing by the curtain. He's not in Germany, George said, his voice trembling with a new kind of shock. He pointed to the side of the stage. He's here. The crowd turned their heads. The cameras swung around. Julian, in the booth, was confused. What? That's impossible. The logistics, the flight time, unless the video had been recorded days ago, unless the extraction had happened last week, and the military, knowing the tour schedule, knowing the significance of this night, had coordinated the ultimate homecoming. George dropped the guitar. He didn't place it on the stand. He let it fall to the floor with a dissonant clang that didn't matter one bit. He walked to the edge of the stage, peering into the shadows. Michael, he called out, his voice raw. Michael, are you there? From the darkness of the stage left wing, movement. A pair of crutches hit the floor first. Clack, clack. Then a figure emerged. He was wearing his dress blues, though the jacket was unbuttoned at the collar. His left leg was in a heavy cast. His face was gaunt, covered in healing scratches, and he had a bandage wrapped around his head. But he was standing. It was Sergeant Michael Reynolds. The noise that came from the stadium was not a cheer. It was a sonic boom of patriotism and love. It was a sound that defied description. George didn't run, he couldn't, his legs were too shaky, but he moved faster than he had in years. He met Michael halfway across the stage. Michael dropped the crutches. He didn't care about the broken leg. He fell forward and George caught him. The king of country caught the broken Marine. They collapsed together, not to the floor, but into a clinch that looked like it was the only thing holding the universe together. George buried his face in Michael's neck, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael, the tough Marine, was crying just as hard, clutching the back of George's black jacket. I got you, George was saying, over and over, his words picked up by the lapel mic on his jacket. I got you, son. I got you, you're home. I made it, Uncle George, Michael choked out. I heard you singing in the dark, I heard you singing. The band, standing in the shadows behind them, were wiping their eyes. The drummer had his head on his snare. The steel guitar player was looking at the ceiling. Julian, the cynical producer, the man of metrics and retention graphs, sat in his chair in the booth. He felt a wetness on his cheek. He touched it, surprised to find a tear. He looked at the screen. The image of the old cowboy holding the wounded soldier was the most perfect, imperfect frame he had ever seen. Keep rolling, Julian whispered, his voice thick. Don't you dare cut away. Keep rolling. On stage, the embrace lasted for a long time. It was a private moment made public, a violation of the barrier between star and fan that somehow felt like a blessing. Finally, George pulled back, holding Michael by the shoulders. He looked him up and down, checking for every injury, every scar. You look like hell, son, George laughed through his tears. "You don't look so good yourself, old man," Michael grinned, though his lip was split. George turned to the audience, his arm firmly wrapped around Michael's waist to support him. He pointed at the boy. "Ladies and gentlemen," George bellowed, his voice returning with the strength of a lion, "my hero, Sergeant Michael Reynolds." The ovation went on for 5 minutes. George didn't try to stop it. He let Michael soak it in. He let the love wash over the boy who had seen too much hate. But the show wasn't over. In fact, George realized the show was just beginning. The set list he had planned, the perfectly curated songs about rodeos and ex-wives, they were useless now. They didn't fit the moment. He looked at the band. He signaled to the stagehands to bring a chair, not a stool, a comfortable chair. They brought one out. George helped Michael sit down center stage. George picked up his guitar from the floor. He checked the tuning. It was a little off from the full, but he didn't care. He walked to the mic. "I had a whole list of songs to play tonight," George said, "but I think we're going to throw that list away." He looked at Michael. "You said you wanted to hear me sing. What do you want to hear, son?" Michael looked at the crowd, then at George. He smiled weakly. "Sing the one about the house, Uncle George, the one about the house built of love." George nodded. "The house that built me." Note, or we can use a classic George Strait song about home like "I Saw God Today" or "Love Without End, Amen" to fit the canon perfectly. Let's pivot to "Love Without End, Amen" as it fits the father-son dynamic perfectly. "Actually," Michael corrected himself, "play the one about fathers." George smiled. He knew exactly which one. "This is for you, Mike," George said, "and for every father waiting for a son and every son wanting to come home." He strummed the opening chords of "Love Without End, Amen." The first chord of "Love Without End, Amen" rang out, not with the polished perfection of a studio recording, but with the raw, vibrating intensity of a prayer offered in a foxhole. George Strait stood center stage, his boots planted firmly on the mark, but his posture had changed. He was no longer the untouchable icon, the cowboy in the white hat who dispensed wisdom from a distance. He was a father singing to a son who had come back from the dead. The acoustic guitar felt heavy in his hands, a wooden anchor keeping him tethered to the earth as his spirit soared with a mixture of relief and lingering terror. He looked at Michael, sitting in the cushioned chair a few feet away, the stage lights catching the fresh bandages on the young Marine's forehead and the gleam of the Purple Heart that someone, likely a swift-thinking general in the wings, had pinned to his torn uniform. Before sending him out, George leaned into the microphone, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. "I got sent home from school one day with a shiner on my eye." The lyrics were old, worn comfortable like a favorite pair of boots, but tonight they carried a new weight. Every word about a father's forgiveness and unconditional love seemed to hang in the air, shimmering with significance. The audience, usually raucous during this classic hit, sang along in a hushed whisper, a choir of 80,000 backing vocalists who understood that they were witnessing a private conversation made public. They saw the way George's voice trembled on the word "daddy," the way he had to pause and swallow hard before delivering the chorus. This wasn't a performance. It was a lullaby for a soldier who had seen too much darkness. High above in the control booth, the atmosphere had shifted from frantic panic to a kind of reverent focus. Julian, the producer who had spent the entire tour obsessing over frame rates and pixel density, was now staring at the monitors with tears streaming down his face, ruining his expensive silk shirt. The red hotline phone on his console was flashing angrily, the network executives in Los Angeles screaming that the show was running over time, that the advertisers were demanding their slots, that this unscripted emotional display was risky. Julian looked at the flashing light. He looked at the screen where George was kneeling down next to Michael during the instrumental bridge, resting his forehead against the boy's temple. It was the most human thing Julian had ever captured on camera. It was art, real, messy, beautiful art. "Julian!" the technical director shouted, pointing at the phone. "LA is on the line. They want to cut to the commercial break. They're saying we're 5 minutes over the slot." Julian didn't hesitate. He reached out and ripped the phone cord from the wall. The flashing light died. "We don't cut," Julian said, his voice low and fierce. "We stay with them. I want camera 1 on a slow push-in. Camera 3, get the reaction of the crowd. Find me people crying. Camera 4, keep it wide. Show the scale of this love. If the network cuts the feed, they can fire me tomorrow, but tonight, we tell this story." The camera operators, energized by their leader's sudden conviction, moved with fluid precision. They captured the sweat on George's brow, the way Michael's hand gripped the armrest of the chair, the way the two men breathed in sync. The broadcast went out to millions of homes, not as a slick concert special, but as a documentary of survival. On stage, the song was reaching its crescendo. George stood up for the final verse, the one about the secret of a father's love. He belted it out, his voice cracking with the strain, finding a power that he hadn't possessed in 20 years. Let me tell you a secret about a father's love. Daddies don't just love their children every now and then. It's a love without end, amen. He held the final note, pointing a shaking finger at Michael and then at the sky. The band swelled behind him, the fiddle crying out a mournful, triumphant melody. As the final chord faded, silence held the stadium for a heartbeat, a vacuum of awe, before the world exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a physical force. People were stomping their feet, the concrete floor vibrating. The sound was deafening, a wall of noise that washed over the stage. George put his guitar down on the stand. He didn't bow to the audience. Not yet. He walked over to Michael. He extended a hand. Michael, wincing in pain but grinning through the agony, took it. With a groan of effort, the young Marine pulled himself up, balancing on his good leg. George wrapped an arm around his waist, taking the weight. They stood there, the old cowboy and the young warrior leaning on each other. "You did good, Uncle George," Michael shouted over the roar. "You didn't miss a note." "I missed every damn note," George laughed, tears flowing freely again. "But I didn't miss you." They turned to the crowd together. George took off his black hat and held it over his heart. Michael attempted a salute, his hand trembling, but snapped it off with as much crispness as his battered body could muster. The image, the cowboy hat and the salute, burned itself into the retinas of everyone watching. It was the defining image of the decade. The house lights came up, blinding and bright. The show was over, but no one moved toward the exits. They wanted to stay in this moment, in this feeling of safety and return. George waved, blew a kiss to the upper decks, and then slowly, carefully, helped Michael turn around. The band played a soft outro, a gentle instrumental loop, as the two men walked up the ramp toward the darkness of the backstage area. The shadows swallowed them, and the giant screens faded to black, leaving only the words, "Welcome home." The transition from the stage to the backstage corridor was jarring. The noise cut off instantly as the heavy soundproof doors swung shut behind them. The air was cooler here, smelling of road cases and stale coffee. The adrenaline that had sustained George began to drain away, leaving him feeling his 69 years. His knees felt weak, his hands shook violently. A team of medics was waiting. They swarmed Michael immediately, checking his vitals, adjusting the bandages on his leg. "Give him air," George barked, his protective instinct flaring. "Back off a little. Let the boy breathe." The medics stepped back slightly, working efficiently but respectfully. They helped Michael onto a gurney. George held onto Michael's hand the entire time, refusing to break the connection. "I'm okay, George," Michael wheezed, lying back. "Just tired. The flight. The painkillers wore off about an hour ago." "We're going to the hospital," George said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I'm riding with you." "Sir," a security guard stepped forward. "The meet and greet, the VIPs." George turned on the guard with a look that could have frozen hell over. "Cancel it. Cancel all of it. Tell the VIPs they can get their money back. I'm going with my son." The guard nodded, swallowing hard, and backed away. Just then, Julian came running down the hallway. He looked disheveled, his tie loosened, sweat staining his collar. He slowed down as he approached the group. He looked at George, then at Michael on the gurney. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a look of profound humility. George stiffened, ready for a fight. He expected Julian to be furious about the ruined schedule, the broken protocol, the phone on stage, but Julian didn't yell. He walked up to the gurney and looked at Michael. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant," Julian said quietly. "And I'm glad you made it back." Then he turned to George. "The network is furious," Julian said. "They're threatening to sue for breach of contract because we went 20 minutes over and cut the ad revenue." "Let them sue," George growled. "I'll pay it out of my own pocket." Julian shook his head. "You won't have to. I just got off the phone with the streaming partners in Asia. The viewership numbers didn't drop. They quadrupled. We broke the internet, George. That clip of you and Michael, it's already got 50 million views. It's the most watched live music event in history." George didn't care about the numbers. He just wanted to get to the ambulance. "George," Julian continued, his voice trembling slightly, I was wrong. About the phone, about the distractions. I thought the show was about the lights and the sound. I forgot that it's supposed to be about the truth. You taught me something tonight. I'm sorry I tried to take that phone away." George looked at the young producer. He saw a man who had been broken open by the night's events, just like everyone else. The anger in George's chest evaporated. There was no room for hate tonight, not when Michael was alive. George extended his hand. "We got through it, son. That's what matters. You kept the cameras rolling when it counted, I saw that." Julian took the hand, gripping it firmly. "Go be with your family, George. I'll handle the press. I'll handle the network. You just go." George nodded. A silent accord passed between the old guard and the new. He turned and climbed into the back of the ambulance that had backed up to the loading dock. The doors slammed shut, sealing out the world of fame and contracts. Inside, it was just the hum of the engine and the beep of the heart monitor. George sat on the bench next to the stretcher. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the phone, the device that had caused so much trouble, the device that had brought him the news of his life. He turned it off. He didn't need it anymore. The person he needed was right there, breathing, alive. "You know," Michael whispered, his eyes fluttering closed as the fresh dose of morphine kicked in. "I really did hear you. In the cave. I kept humming, 'Check yes or no.' It kept me awake. It kept me from giving up." George stroked Michael's hair, pushing the bangs back from his forehead. "And you kept me singing, Mike. I was about to hang it up. I was done. But I think I've got a few more songs in me now." The ambulance pulled away from the stadium, navigating through the crowds of fans who were still lingering in the parking lots, tailgating, celebrating the miracle they had witnessed. They waved at the ambulance, not knowing who was inside, just knowing that something holy had happened in that building. The following morning, the world woke up to a different kind of news cycle. For once, the front pages weren't dominated by scandals or political infighting. Every newspaper, every website, every feed featured the same image. George Strait and Michael Reynolds, forehead to forehead, crying on stage. "The Song of Survival," read the headline of the Texas Tribune. But George didn't see the papers. He was in a private room at the Dallas VA Medical Center. The sun was rising, casting that same orange glow that had started the story on the ranch porch. But this time, the light wasn't dying. It was being born. Michael was asleep, his leg elevated, his breathing deep and rhythmic. The doctors said he would walk again. It would take time and a lot of therapy, but he would walk. He would ride again. George sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, his hat resting on his knee. He watched the rise and fall of Michael's chest. It was the most beautiful rhythm he had ever seen, better than any beat a drummer could lay down. He thought about Julian's words, about the perfect broadcast. He realized that life wasn't about the high-definition signal or the seamless transition. Life was the glitch. Life was the interference. Life was the messy, unplanned, heartbreaking interruption that forced you to stop the show and remember who you were. He reached for his guitar case, which Rick had dropped off earlier. He opened it quietly, careful not to wake Michael. He didn't take the guitar out. He just ran his hand over the wood, feeling the vibrations of the previous night still trapped in the grain. He took a pen from the bedside table and a scrap of paper. He began to write. Not a set list, not a contract. Verse 1. "The signal died, the lights went down. I was lost in the noise of a worried town, but through the static, a voice came through, a broken prayer, leading me to you." George smiled. It was a start, a new song. A song about the night the music stopped so that life could begin. He put the pen down and leaned back, closing his eyes. The notification had come. The wait was over. The cowboy could finally rest, not because the ride was over, but because the herd was safe. The silence in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. It was the silence of peace. And for the king of country, sitting in a plastic chair next to his sleeping boy, that was the only standing ovation that mattered.